Dogen passed away, and his third successor became extremely important to Soto. And it's one of the reasons why Soto has had such a strong impact on this country, although there are lots of Rinzai masters. And that third successor was named Keizan. And Keizan was long-lived, and he decided that he was going to take Zen to the people. Now, that didn't necessarily mean he went out and set up a bunch of little zendos where the lay people would participate. But the traditions in Japan were that Buddhism was ceremonies. Various beautiful ceremonies, sometimes very elaborate, very colorful. And Keizan, I think, must have looked at that and thought, we're missing the boat here. If you're living on the side of a mountain training monks or being trained, you still need to have some food. And if you put yourself in the middle of nowhere, how do you get the food? So I think he had a practical side. But he also had a side that was a very religious side in that he wanted to take the teachings of Dogen and the great masters. He wanted to share that with the people. And so what he did is he wrote liturgy. He put together a very specific liturgy for Soto that was not like what anybody else did. And as far as I know, it's still not like what anybody else does. Because I can tell you that all the Zen traditions in the world, their liturgy is pretty much the same. And when I was studying with a Vietnamese teacher and he started translating things, I was amazed to find out that, hey, we're doing the same thing the Koreans are doing, and the Vietnamese and the Chinese, and to a great extent what the Rinzai school was doing. But the Soto school was doing something different. And one of the things they did is they came up with a ceremony, if you would, that lasted a week for becoming a Buddhist. That's a long time. And what they came up with was the idea that lay people would go and live at the monastery. Now, they did in China. You got to understand, they did in China. They didn't in Japan. But in China, where Zen was the way, lay people would move in like the sixth patriarch and work at the temple and get a chance to practice. But this was not happening in Japan. And so they came up with a ceremony that people could go and stay at the temple, and they would get to practice like the monks practice. They'd chant in the morning and sit and have the silent meals and do all these things. And then at the end of this, the last day of this, in the evening, they would go through a very awe-inspiring ceremony. They'd set up a maze within the temple where the people would move through it. And think of this as an initiation, because that's exactly the right word for it. And they would move through these things, and they would learn about what they were doing. Monks would be in spots that would explain things to them. And finally, when they got through the end of this, they had taken the precepts, they had taken the refuges, and they would be given a lineage chart. A little scroll wrapped up. And on that would start with the Buddha's name and go down through all the different Zen patriarchs. And then there would be their teacher's name, because somebody had to be their teacher in there. It could very likely be the abbot of the temple, but it also could be another master that was living there that they maybe were studying with. And then on that chart would be their name. Okay? And so Keizan literally gave the lineage to the lay people. And that's a stupendous thing. If he'd never done anything else, he came up with a ceremony where the lay people joined the Sangha. And then they got a little thing to wear. Now, they didn't get a rakusu. What they got was a simpler version of the rakusu. And the early ones, I have one stuffed away that I take it out like every 5 years if somebody says, oh, I'd really like to see that. It's pretty neat. But it's called a wagesa. And it looks kind of like what Catholic priests wear, that little ribbon they put over when they're going to do the sacraments. Well, it looks just like that. And they can be short and they can be long. It usually has these symbols. These are the two symbols for the two monasteries, training monasteries in Soto. And the lay people are given this. And the simple one is simply a brown ribbon kind of affair that they wear around their neck, and and they put that on when they go to the temple. They don't get to wear that they only wear that for 1 year. They don't get to wear it again if they don't go to that retreat. So the very arduous practitioners in the Soto tradition go to the temple every year. Because once they start wearing that, they want to, now nobody's going to make them take it off, but they want to be honest, so they would go to this retreat. Every year they would have a planned retreat at a monastery where they did chanting and meditation and ceremony, and they could wear this thing. And it kind of set them apart. When they were at their home temple, they would be wearing this thing. And people would see, they went to the retreat. Of course, from a practical standpoint, because there's always more sides of the coin, that the monk there probably called on them on a regular basis for help. Whether it was help with a tile or help with cutting trees, or maybe he needed a little money to fix something. These were the important people of the temple. But I think it's telling. I think it's important to note that the important people of this temple were the people that went off and did a retreat. They weren't important because they were the most wealthy family. They were important because they went off and they did at least one retreat a year and put that extra effort in there and tried to put themselves in the place of a monk while remaining householders. Keizan popularized Soto. In Japan today, the largest sect is Jodo Shin, which is the Pure Land, which simply requires a great deal of faith in the Buddha and some very simple practice. And study is limited to the Lotus Sutra. Not much else is looked at. But in the Zen school, Soto is the largest, and it's the second largest sect in Japan. That doesn't mean everybody practices meditation. I think it'd be safe to say 99% of the Soto Buddhists in Japan do not practice meditation. It never crossed their mind. They go to the temple on the holidays. They tithe. That's a Japanese practice once a year. The family tithes. And they can say, my family's been tithing to this temple for 350 years. They have family connections to these things. Rinzai, when it arrived in Japan, everything was quite different. There was again a lot of emphasis on practice. The monks began doing ceremonies for the population and things like that, but they didn't have this special piece. They didn't have ceremonies that were specifically written to go out and do for the community, for the town. They had ceremonies, but they were kind of the established ceremonies that were done by everybody else. They were fractured in the sense that lots of lineage lines grew up. They grew around teachers. The monasteries tended to be small. Unlike in China, in Japan, a normal size following in a monastery, 10 to 20 monks was normal, and still is normal. And there are very few training monasteries that are full, but it's still normal, 10 to 20 monks. And the image of the kind of cranky old master, that's sleeping in a cold, windy room, and he's got these 10 or 20 monks that he's trying to just get them to pay attention. And he's whacking them all the time and giving them koans, and they got a little garden over in the corner of the yard, and they're trying to get enough food to survive. But the people support them. But there was never this strong move. It helped that nobility liked them. In the early days of Zen, the nobility, they were attracted to Rinzai. A lot of emphasis on confronting death. So they did get support that way. And before the Meiji Restoration, temples generally had allowances. All temples had allowances. So that they weren't super generous, but they could stay out of poverty. They could support themselves.